All right, welcome to our class notes for this week for cell organelles part one. Part one here for you. So not a ton to do. We're gonna go through, and the reason I'm doing this on Friday at the end of the week is because at this point, hopefully, you've gone through and you've done a little bit of this stuff, and so what I'm having you guys go through is not new information. You've kind of done a little bit of already the learning that has gone into place here with some of these things that we're about to talk about today. As we go through notes, a couple things. Reminder, as always, that go with my pace. Okay, so pause it, type, hit play, so that you are typing about the same bullet point that I am talking about. Okay, do not just go to a slide, pause it, copy the slide down, move to the next one. Okay, I know that's when I grade your class notes, I see that you copy all the notes, but then when I look at the timestamps on your document in Google Classroom, some of you only have the document open for 5-6 minutes, even though my video is 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 minutes sometimes. That just tells me that you're not listening to me. I'm taking the time to do this as the best way to kind of give you guys some instruction and explain what it is that you're learning about. And so I think it's really important for you to listen to me as we go through and do these notes. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. One other thing I'm going to tell you, and this will kind of be interesting to see as well, extra credit for you, is that if you add in some pictures that are usually just graphics, because we don't always see the parts of a cell under a microscope, which you might be able to, but if you just put in some pictures like I have on my slides, as we go through and we talk about some of the parts of a cell, I will give you extra credit. My only rule is you can't use any of my pictures that I have in this presentation. Okay, you can't use any of my pictures. So, all right, let's go ahead and move forward. All right, so the first thing that we have to understand before we start talking about what's inside the cell, we have to recognize that there are two main types of cells that are out there in all living things. Those are prokaryotes versus eukaryote. Okay, so first of all, make sure you say those correctly. When you mispronounce words, it doesn't sound like you know what you're talking about or that you understand information. Okay, so it's prokaryote and eukaryote. Prokaryotes, let's start with those. In a prokaryote, there are no true nucleuses. And so, like it said in the Edpuzzle, pro means no. So not only is there a nucleus, but any other type of membrane type part or organelle does not exist in a prokaryote, because pro means no, prokaryote, no true nucleus. Bacteria, archaea, these are like very simple organisms. They are usually just a single cell for the entire organism. Those are the things that are mainly prokaryotes. Eukaryotes. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus. You do. The other way I remember it is that you are made of eukaryotic cells. You have eukaryotes inside of you, because all of your cells, no matter what, if it's a bone cell, a blood cell, a skin cell, brain cell, they're all eukaryotes. So there you go. Animal. That's you. Okay? Plants also. Protists, which are usually microscopic organisms, so they're usually not very big either, but they can be eukaryotes. And then fungus. Okay? So any type of fungi is also a eukaryote. Cell theory. So you guys hopefully are pretty familiar with cell theory by now. You've seen it in a couple of different places. So for cell theory, 3 things, and you need to know them. All cells, okay, all living things, I'm sorry, all living things are composed of cells, meaning that they are made of cells. So if it's a plant, it's made of cells. If it's bacteria, it's made of cells. If it's a human, it's made of cells. All living things are composed of cells. Part 2 of cell theory is that cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. And it's important, that last part, in living things, because the basic unit of structure for anything in our universe isn't really the cell, it's the atom. Okay? In fact, cells are made out of atoms. But when we talk about the basic unit of structure and function within a living thing, then we're going to focus on cells, okay? Because it's important to understand how the cells are making that organism what it is, whether it's something super simple like a bacteria or something really, really, really complex like humans and giraffes and other types of mammals. Okay. And then the last part of cell theory is that all cells are produced from other cells. Okay. Now, it's important to recognize that it says that they're produced from other cells, not of other cells. Cells are not made up of cells. Cells are made up of atoms. Okay. And then there's parts of a cell that we're going to go through, these things called the organelles that we'll go through. All right. But cells are made from other cells, and that's called reproduction. Okay. So cell reproduction happens when one cell splits and becomes two cells. And depending on the organism, there's a couple of different ways to do this, and that's a little bit later. I don't know if we'll actually even get to that part this year, but you will in 7th grade of how that works. But cells come from other cells. And so if you say, well, where did the first cell come from? Well, that goes all the way back to when scientists believe through evolution of how the first parts of life happen. Okay, the first life, scientists believe that was on our planet was a single cell organism, was a type of bacteria called cyanobacteria. And so that's why it would make sense that we would start with the first life form as being just a single cell, and then it grows into multicellular things and evolves over millions and billions of years. Okay, so all cells are produced from other cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and all living things are made of cells. That's cell theory. So let's get to the parts of a cell, okay? So we're going to, from this point on, we're calling them cell organelles. The word organ is in there, just like your body has organs in there, these parts inside of your body that help you function. The cell has these little things inside of them that helps the cell carry out not only its functions and jobs, but survival and sustain life within that organism. So we're going to go through these kind of based on a category of what their job is or what their function is within the cell. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit when I go through these. I'll mention whether they're in prokaryotes or eukaryotes, whether they're in plant cells or animal cells. Okay, the article that you guys went through did it differently. It organized it as, all right, these are the things that are in both plant and animal cells. Here are the things that are just in animal cells. Here are the things that are just in plant cells. Okay, so I'm doing it a little bit differently in our notes. So let's start with the things, the organelles that control what's happening in a cell. And there's really only one thing, and that's the nucleus. The nucleus is like the boss. It's like the principal. It's like, I don't know, who's the boss in your house? Your parents should be probably, right? So the nucleus has this nuclear envelope, which is like a nuclear membrane around it that protects it, okay? And that's important because in eukaryotes, you have these membrane-bound organelles. In prokaryotes, there are none of those. No nucleus because nucleus has a membrane around it. Inside the nucleus, important stuff for next year. Chromosomes. So one of the units you will do in 7th grade science with me next year is that you have chromosomes inside, and inside the chromosomes are DNA. So all of the heredity and genetic information and instructions and blueprints and all these things of how cells are made, how they're reproduced, whether you should have blonde hair or green eyes, you suntan well or you burn, all those things are within the DNA, and it's inside those chromosomes, which is located in the nucleus. Okay, there it is, DNA heredity. Okay, there's also this little other kind of like circular ball. I know it's kind of hard to see in the picture here, but it's over here. It's called the nucleolus. I think they talked about this in your ed puzzle as well. And that's where ribosomes are made. That word is pronounced ribosomes every year. Even though I'm not at school with you right now, I know some of you read that and you say ribosomes. Ribs are good. No, ribosomes is how you say it. Okay, and ribosomes are important. We'll talk about those here in a little bit. All right, like we were saying, in a nucleus, in eukaryotes, you have a nucleus, but you do not have a true nucleus in prokaryotes. they still have DNA and chromosomes, but it's just kind of free floating in the cell. It's not contained and housed in this nucleus. Okay, if we're going to talk again really quick about what its function is, what its job is, it controls all of the cell's activities. All right, and I like to use analogies to kind of help as we go through the PowerPoint here and as we go through each of these organelles to help kind of relate what their job is. So nucleus is kind of like the control room with the computer. They have someone sitting there and it has like all these monitors up there and it's sitting there and everything is being run through there and all the functions, all the jobs, everything's being watched and control completely happens within that room there. So it's kind of like the control center. Okay, the next type of organelle we're going to talk about are the ones responsible for creating energy and transforming energy so that the cell can carry out all these different functions and jobs and survive. And there's really only one that we care about, and that is really important for us, and it's the mitochondria. Now, if your parents are around you right now, if you ask them, what's the powerhouse of the cell? They'll be like, oh, the mitochondria. It is one of those things that you just always remember from biology classes, that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And the reason that we call it the powerhouse of the cell is because it's making power in the form of energy. And the process for this to happen is called cellular respiration. And we're going to get way more specific into cellular respiration next year too. So just like chromosomes and DNA we're going to get into next year, we're going to also talk about cellular respiration next year. So I'll come back to you at one point and ask you, where does all the energy come from in a cell? And you'll have to remember, the powerhouse. Powerhouse of the cell is mitochondria. So what happens in this process, just to kind of simplify it, is that it takes food, specifically glucose, which is a sugar, and it turns it into what's called ATP. Okay, ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. You don't need to know that. ATP is energy. It's usable energy that the cell can then use to carry out and sustain life. So within that mitochondria, not only is it producing that energy by turning food into energy, but then it obviously stores it for when it needs it. Keeps it ready for rapid use so that it's right there, kind of like on the go. Like nothing else has to happen. No other process has to happen. They do that process of cellular respiration, and that ATP, that energy, is just ready to go. It's ready for rapid use. Oop, my picture's covering that up there. Mitochondria are in eukaryotes, right? And they are in plant and animal cells. They are also membrane bound, so they're not in bacteria, and we don't see them in most prokaryotes. And there it is. The analogy I use is the power plant. Okay, it's the powerhouse, the power plant that makes the energy for the cell. Moving on. Let's talk about boundaries now. So boundaries are those things that are along the perimeter on the outside. So let's talk about the one thing that every single type of cell has, whether it's prokaryote or eukaryote, that's a cell membrane. And a cell membrane has this term that you need to know as well. It's called selective permeability, or selectively permeable, depending on how you word it, okay? And what that means is just that not everything is able to transfer and pass in and out of the cell. It's selective. Only certain things are allowed in and out. And that's really important. It's important to make sure for the processes that are happening, making sure that certain things don't get in, making sure certain things it doesn't need anymore get out, or things that need to get out and go to other parts of the body. It's really important for that stuff to happen. It also kind of keeps a balance between what's inside the cell and outside the cell. And I think in the Ed Puzzle talked about this term homeostasis that the cell membrane is responsible for trying to keep. Like I said, it is in all cells. The cell membrane is in all cells. Lets material enter, leave the cell. It's just choosy, right? It's really picky. My analogy, it's like a building with walls, okay, and then maybe there's a door and there's someone there. that is letting them in, or maybe it's like the school and like you need like teachers have like a fob that they put up and then the door opens for them because the door is not just going to let everybody in, right? Or a gate where there's someone there kind of inspecting who's coming in and who's coming out. All right, another type of boundary. So this is under the same subheading in your notes. The cell wall. Okay. Now the cell wall is on the outside of the cell membrane. So all cells have a cell membrane, but not all cells have a cell wall. And the cell wall is on the outside. So it is not selectively permeable. In fact, even though it's a boundary, its job is not allowing things to enter and leave. Its job is more for support and structure. Okay? Cellulose makes it very rigid. It's stiff. Okay? Think of celery. Celery has lots of cellulose in it. And that's one of the reasons why it's so crunchy. And like when you bite into celery and the stringy stuff, like that's usually a good way to say, oh, that's the cellulose of it. And so that's making the cells, the boundary of those cells, really stiff and rigid. So not only is it offering support, but it's going to protect it as well. It's protecting things already from the membrane because it's outside of the membrane. Cell walls we usually consider just to be in plant cells. Recently, some scientists have found some evidence that in certain types of bacteria, there might be some cell walls too. But in general, we usually say they're in plant cells, and for sure, they are not in animal cells. So one of the things you're going to need to know for this unit are 3 ways that plant cells are different than animal cells. So one of the ways is that plant cells have a cell wall, animal cells do not. So there's number 1 right there. Okay, we'll get to the organisms then, or the organelles, the organelles that do assembly of certain things like ribosomes, transport materials, or store things like food and water. We'll get to in part 2 next week. So that's it for today for the notes, and for this week for the notes. If you're doing this on a Friday, I hope you had a good week and you have a great weekend. Take care.